So in this presentation, we are going to cover the change of the international realm for the Trudeau government here in Canada, which just took over, was just sworn in, the cabinet was a few weeks ago. It'll talk about many of the topics that we covered in class between the just war theory and liberalism as a theory in and of itself, as well as some economic and supranational agreement portions of our course. So first, on Monday, the 19th of October, it was a highly contested election in Canada, which had a significant Liberal victory, where the Liberals got more than 60% of an increase in votes from the 2011 federal election, which was generally based off of taking votes from the New Democratic Party, and a substantially higher voter turnout, as Conservative votes remain level. And this trend can be seen by other Liberal governments that is generally popularly supported by the entire population, although a high voter turnout is necessary to make sure that leftist parties can win. So, taking a more graphic representation of this issue, the majority is taken by the Liberal Party with 182 seats in the Canadian Parliament, and the majority opposition is the Conservative Party, which former Prime Minister Stephen Harper is going to remain in Parliament, but he did give up his seat as the leader of the Conservative Party. So one of the first issues that we can talk about is Canada in the realm of North America with NAFTA and the North American Free Trade Agreement. And Justin Trudeau has promised to end the opposition to the anti-NAFTA economics, and basically by this, the United States and Canada had, even prior to NAFTA, a very liberal relationship with each other, and there was always an aspect of free trade between the United States and Canada. But most of Justin Trudeau's new economic policies dealing with international is to deal with Mexico in a more productive manner that is also liberal, as with the liberal theory, the reduce of barriers for international trade and more so free trade is a large part of this. And another part of this also is green energy commitments, as we'll see later on in this presentation, is another way that Canada sees itself being able to benefit when working with a partnership with the United States and Mexico. So Justin Trudeau has seen, and the Liberals have generally seen, that Canada has been decreasing in its role in the world stage, and that was one of the big campaign topics of them criticizing the Harper government previous. So the Liberals are intending to emphasize international collaboration diplomacy, whether that be through NATO or the United Nations or through many of the other agreements that Canada has entered into. And they want to see a more demanding outlook in the United Nations and make sure that the Canadian viewpoint is always one of the leaders instead of a follower. And this also deals with climate change, as we'll see later on. And also defense reform, as has been in the news. The Canadians are pulling out of the bombing and air raids on ISIS, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Canada is going to pull completely out of the game. Canada sees itself as being now a leader in negotiations and making sure that there is just war in the world, and that we'll see also later. So the Trudeau government has talked about reinventing Canada's military, as the military is a forceful way of dealing with international issues, and they really see a big benefit in investing and diversifying the military, which includes veterans benefits, which have been lacking under the Harper government. And Canada sees itself as domesticating its military use, so that means ice breaking in the North Sea and being able to open up shipping routes, which is another economic benefit. And being committed to United Nations missions is another big thing. Canada doesn't want to see itself going in alone. They want to see an international consensus before they do anything, which is another policy of liberal supranationalism. And they also want to avoid the direct combat operations, as they've seen with ISIS in the Middle East in general, between the Iraq War and whatnot. And also modernization is a big thing, working with international partners on making sure that the West's defense policy actually works, and they have the equipment to continue to invest, even though they are not going to buy the new aircraft fighters from the United States as the Harper government intended to. So specifically, with two different conflicts going on in the world today, ISIS, of course, the Trudeau government is going to end the combat mission, but at the same time, they plan to welcome over 25,000 Syrian refugees, which is basically Canada's way of doing their part without having to be directly involved in combat. So they try to make a wash out of it. And then in the Ukraine, the Trudeau government has made a much stronger appeal to support Central and Eastern European allies, whether that be the former Warsaw Pact nations or Ukraine in general. And Canada now sees itself as a way to strengthen its NATO alliance, as a way to prevent Russian aggression. And this particularly deals with sort of the proxies that have been occurring at the north and the Arctic regions, where Russia has tried to assert itself a little bit in a way, and the United States and Canada and our Scandinavian partners are seeing themselves under threat. So Canada sees itself under the Trudeau government as a way to curb Russian aggression all across the world, whether it be in the Ukraine or in the north or in Syria for general. So now shifting to more of a domestic outlook on the Liberal Party in Canada. As an international cooperation, the Liberal government is demanding that they adopt several, between the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and the International Arms Treaty, several international agreements that from an American aspect would be considered to be infringing on sovereignty, but from the Liberal aspect in Canada is just more of a moral thing to do. First with the Aboriginal people, especially the Inuits, giving them the correct support and lifestyle that they intend, and also on the border with the United States, just as the United States sees Mexico as a threat from smuggling weapons and drugs into the States, Canada sees the same from the United States, and so at the border they intend to be cracking down on its smuggling of weapons and drugs from the United States, especially as the United States is much more lax on its gun control policies than is Canada. Even Canada sees itself as a way of increasing their gun control policy and stopping the smuggling, which hopefully will decrease whatever minor effects has been had through that at the border. And last but not least, Canada sees itself as a major partner in the fight on climate change. Canada will attend the Paris conference coming up in the next year, and they will phase out fossil fuels subsidies over the next 20 years, something especially in the States that they've been very reluctant to do, being that the oil companies basically control a large portion of government votes. In Canada, the government being not so much campaign donations from large businesses, the government is more, and the people in the government are much more willing to make agreements to curb fossil fuel emissions. And also they want to create a North American energy agreement, which is what we talked about with NAFTA originally at the beginning of the presentation. And the clean energy technology for the economic benefit is another big thing, especially as they talk about New Building Canada Fund, which is basically a fund that the Trudeau government intends to expand in the future, which is a fund that basically goes to building infrastructure, which also goes to the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, which is another way that Canada intends to increase infrastructure for the international partnership. And so basically, as between climate change and other factors in North America, Canada sees NAFTA as a very appropriate way to handle this, even though opinion in the States may not be quite as beneficial towards NAFTA. Canada sees NAFTA as a way for all three nations in the agreement to see economic and climate change benefit out of it. So in conclusion, some of the basic principles that the Trudeau government has in its international outlook include being a leader in the world, whether it be through making sure that the just war theory is followed and other international conflict rules and things like the Geneva Convention are followed, And the Canadians, now under the Trudeau government, want to lead existing international organizations, whether that be the United Nations or NATO, which is a very liberal concept. And they also want to create these international agreements. And at the same time, they want to assess and make sure that the combat operations are just, that the Canadian people aren't spending money recklessly, and also leading the international political economy, whether that be through green energy and also with the environmental sensitivity. So that is a rundown of some of the basic changes that the Trudeau government will have on Canadian foreign policy, whether it be here in North America or in the international realm.